here's a list of the faculty at the Department of Biological and Agricultural Engineering. And that's technically what the talk today is about, the Department of Biological and Agricultural Engineering. But the substance of this book, in my estimation, goes far beyond that, far beyond Texas. It's basically, this is the time frame is 1915 to 2015. And if you stop and think about what has happened in American agriculture in the past 100 years, a lot. What has happened in American life in the past 100 years? An horrendous amount, isn't it? And the reason for that change is agriculture, largely. Agriculture is what brought humankind basically from the hunting-gathering stage into the whatever stage we have now, civilization as we call it, or whatever it is, urbanization, what have you. It wouldn't have happened without agriculture. Stop and think about it. Sometimes we don't get down to the basics. So agriculture is a fundamental reality in our life. And in Texas, you can see it as you can see it nowhere else, I think. And a lot of us, including myself, has sort of grown up with that tremendous change in agriculture. I'll talk to you more about, maybe I should use this a little bit. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. I'll put this over here. Does that work?
You're plenty loud.
I'm plenty loud? Too loud? There's a message there. Anyway, howdy, and I appreciate your coming and glad you could be here. I hope you've acclimated yourself to the time change. Springing forward is not easy, is it? I've just never quite make that stride very easily at all. But we are here, and that's a big plus. This history about biological and agricultural engineering agriculture at A&M is really technically a history of the Department of Biological and Agricultural Engineering. Steve Searcy is the current head of that department, has been for quite some time, and you probably know some of the past presidents, Holt and so forth, but we'll talk more about that later. If you would like more precise information about the department, of course, take your computer and go to Baen, B-A-E-N, TAMU.edu, and it's all there. And then read the book, too, if you want to know more. And there's a lot more about the story. The Department of Agricultural Engineering is a department of roughly 50 faculty members, and I think 20 adjunct faculty. And it's really an interesting and impressive agglomeration, let's say, of people and subject matters for that matter. It has many dimensions. The subject matter has many dimensions. The faculty have many dimensions internationally and domestically. It's really an international faculty and an international project they deal with. The story of the Department of Biological and Agricultural Engineering from 1915 to 2015 pretty well explains the story of what's really happened in American life and Texas life, global life, and everything. It's been a transformative experience in the past 100 years. Many of us have lived a good portion of that 100 years. And in fact, I guess you could say I grew up in agriculture. I'll tell you more about that later. But anyway, agriculture is the most powerful element in the development of civilization. It really is, no question about it. And as I say, it's agriculture that brought about the transition of humankind from that hunting, gathering, whatever it was, phase we were in, although that does sound attractive sometimes, doesn't it? to the law and order and what have you of civilization. And it does give you a good sense of the transformation of life in Texas and everywhere in that 100 years. In 1915, some 2 million Texans farmed and raised crops worth $6.5 million, or $3 per capita. That was 1915. In 2015, and today, roughly, about 400,000 Texans farm not 2 million, 400,000. A lot fewer farmers. You can tell when you drive out in the country. But those 400,000 Texas farmers produce crops worth $13.7 billion, or roughly $547 per capita. And that tells you a good idea of how the world has changed. And it's because of that we can live in cities and we can eat. You all are involved in agriculture, you know. We all are. If you like to eat, boy, that's what it's all about. Agriculture. In that same 100-year period, let's go back to the local setting for just a moment. Texas A&M had 915 students in 1915. How many do we have today, huh? 60,000 roughly. Wow, what a change. And I remember some of that, a good part of that change myself, I guess. I came here in 1969. And face it, our world has changed dramatically in just that time. And it's still changing, incidentally. Our community is changing. College Station is changing. I think the projection is that the College Station will roughly double its population by 2050. Isn't that right? That's kind of the projection they're using. The world changes constantly. So we've gone from 915 students to 60,000 students. I can't remember the population when I came enrollment. Roughly, I'm thinking 12,000 roughly in 1969. Do you remember, Jerry, or anything?
I got here almost that soon.
Well, and today we've got 60,000 or so, and Aggies and people everywhere, you know, we have one thing in common: we like to eat, and agriculture is central to that eating. And think about the major crops in Texas. We usually don't put things in simplistic terms like this, but what does Texas produce? Well, cotton. Just drive down to the Brazos, you know, cotton, corn, wheat, sugarcane a little bit, not like Louisiana does, lots of it over there. Rice, I love rice. We produce rice. In fact, did a history of the American rice industry, among other, I don't know if that book's there or not, but mainly because I like rice and gravy. I suppose is what got me into that, and that was a fun thing to do, incidentally, and one of the great experiences in my life was to be invited to go to Japan and talk to them about the history of the American rice industry. My wife and I and friends been over there about 5 or 6 weeks, I guess it was. We're all over Japan talking about rice. And they do rice a lot different than we do. I mean, they have their field is about as big as this room, and they get out there and hand pick and hand do everything. It's kind of an interesting world, an exciting world. And they even published a copy of this book in the Japanese language, incidentally. And we grow fruit, vegetables, and what have yous, don't we? Peanuts, soybeans, hay. If I leave anything out, please jump in and add it. Flowers, grapes, grapevines, wine. Pardon? Pecans, there we go. Good, okay.
And beef.
And beef, pork, thank you. Yeah, beef, pork, cattle. That's what it's all about. Cows like to eat too, don't they? And hogs. I grew up, you may be aware slightly, I guess, really immersed in agriculture. I was born in 1934 in New Orleans, as someone mentioned, and that year we moved to Natchitoches, Louisiana, which was correctly pronounced. And my dad started an international harvester dealership with an uncle in Natchitoches in 1934. That's why we came there. My mother was from Natchitoches, incidentally. So we moved there. My older brother was there. His younger sister came along later. And literally, I grew up in agriculture. I remember those old tractors when they first started, you know, the lug wheels, horrendous-looking things. But they worked, and that sure beat, in a way, the mule and the plow. And you couldn't convince everybody it beat that, because I had an old uncle when I was a kid, and he refused to get a tractor. I don't know if he could afford it or not afford it, but he plowed with a mule. And I worked for him, right behind that mule. He raised sweet potatoes, and my job was to follow along behind him in the plow. And when he turned the sweet potatoes over, when they're ready for harvest, I picked them up and put them in a bag, and we harvested the sweet potatoes. He paid me good, probably a quarter a day or something, I bet. You know, I have some more stories about that. Oh yeah, speaking of that, cotton. Grew up in practically a cotton patch. One of my dad's, he didn't do much for me. He just sold tractors and stuff. But I had a cotton in my backyard, and every Saturday morning when I was a kid, me and some of my friends went out and picked cotton. Every cotton was hand-picked, you know, in the 30s and 40s, for the most part. We carefully, every Saturday morning, we carefully picked 10 pounds of cotton, each of us. And the guy who owned the cotton patch was Mr. Rachel, and we took the cotton to him, and he emptied it out, weighed it carefully, and paid us a penny a pound for every pound we picked. And with 10 pounds, we got 10 pennies. And with that 10 pennies, we walked a mile on a gravel road downtown Natchitoches. They had a movie theater there. We went to the movie. It cost 9 cents. And we had a penny left over for Kit candy. Boy, what a good life, I tell you. That was good living. Well, time passed a little bit, and I grew up a little bit, not a lot, I guess. And I graduated into tractor work. When I was a little bit older kid in high school, I had a formal Cub tractor. My job was to mow our pasture and all that kind of stuff. And of course, I cleaned out the stall for the cow. We had a Jersey cow, and I showed the calf and so forth at livestock shows. But I didn't milk the cow. My dad did all that. He didn't want me to milk that cow. And everything was hand done, you know, in those days. We didn't have electric milkers much in those days. But they were coming. And a story about that incident is my cow Jersey was kind of a reckless cow, and she liked to kick every now and then. She'd kick the bucket, kick at my dad, and boy, my dad would kick it back. And that cow settled down. They got along okay. I checked cotton, for example, with Dr. Bill Irwin when I was growing up in high school and everything. We checked the fields for boll weevils and flea hoppers and all that kind of stuff. And then he would figure out the report and bring it figure out what kind of fertilizer they needed and bring it to the Ken Metters, who was the dusting pilot. And Ken Metters had a Stearman airplane with those two-seater things, and he'd load it up with the right, not fertilizer, dust, and fly over the cotton fields and so forth. And he actually took me up once. I didn't want to go twice. I want to tell you, that's one thing I learned I didn't want to do right there. I don't want to be a duster pilot. Man, that guy would come in clipping those treetops and hitting those tops of the cotton even fields. Man, what a world. Yes?
What was he dusting with then?
It was a Stearman, two-passenger
No, I mean
Stearman.
the insecticide, the chemical.
I don't remember the chemical at all. But it different. They varied the content in order to kill the different, depending on what the bug count was. They could vary it slightly. But I really wouldn't know. But good question. And anyways, a two-seater Stearman. I didn't want to be a duster pilot. I did try to take flying lessons later when I went on to be in the Navy for a while and stationed at Jacksonville Naval Air Station. Decided I'd take a few flying lessons and learn to fly. My dad flew a little bit. And I quickly decided I didn't want to fly it either. Because over there, man, those Navy pilots and everything else were flying all over the place. I was stationed at Jacksonville Naval Air Station. And they just run over you almost, you know. So I took flight out of my plans totally. In any event, that's my part of the story. Now let's get back to the main part of the story, which is basically Texas A&M and its Department of Biological and Agricultural Engineering and the revolution that has taken place, the transformation that has taken place in American society, global society for that matter. Let me tell you how I got to Texas A&M. One more aside, if you don't mind. I went to a Southwestern historical meeting. I was teaching at the University of Southwestern Louisiana in Lafayette at the time. And well, that was good living down there, incidentally. You've heard the phrase, laissez le bon temps, let the good times roll. We did. That was fun. Those Cajuns, okay. In any event, I went to the meeting of the Southwestern Historical Association at the Rice Hotel in Houston one time. And first, it was a memorable moment in my life because it was the first time I had ever been on an escalator. Boy, moving stairs. Can you imagine? Sure enough. And what was even more memorable about that occasion is when I got to that second level, there was a guy standing at the top of that thing, and he had his finger pointing at me. It was Milton Nance, head of the Department of History at Texas A&M. And he looked at me and he said, "You want to come to A&M?" And I wasn't sure I wanted to come to A&M. I was having a good time in Lafayette, but we sat down and talked a while, and I said, "Yeah, sure, I'd like to come to Texas A&M." So we came to Texas A&M in 1969, and we'd been here, planned to be here for another 10 or 20 years, whatever it is, and we've enjoyed it thoroughly. It's been a great world to be in, still is. And A&M has been a wonderful experience. Let's talk mechanization, though. Let's talk mechanization, irrigation, electrification, and biological food and fiber engineering briefly, because that's what really is the subject matter at hand. In 1915, there were 25,000 trucks and tractors and 479,000 automobiles. That's total in American farms everywhere, period. We were not mechanized in 1915. That was just, that was still a dream world for everybody. One of the first tractors in Texas was a Roomley, 1919, Roomley oil pull tractor it was called, which Texas A&M purchased basically and exhibited so people could see what a tractor was. The Roomley oil pull tractor. And in 1915, the Department of Biological, or really Agricultural Engineering in those days, now Biological and Agricultural Engineering, came into existence, and Elmer G. was the first head of that department. And one of the first things that Elmer G. did, incidentally, was to organize a demonstration farm of 120 acres across the tracks, so that people could go over there and see what farming really was all about, and put tractors on it so you could see how to use a tractor instead of a mule. It was really a revolutionary moment. And the department began offering 8-week courses for everybody, the general public, students, anybody who wanted to come, to see what mechanization was all about. You could see it, feel it, and that was important, because people had never seen a tractor before. Most people still didn't have automobiles. I still remember my first automobile. Boy, was it a wonderful vehicle. I was in high school. I got a 1928 Model A. My dad had taken it on a trade in a tractor, and he gave it to me. Man, I love that thing. Had good times. In any event, we had a demonstration farm on campus as of 1919. In 1921, department head Daniel Scotes introduced what we called farm fairs on the A&M campus. And the department had public displays in front of its building. Scotes Hall now, of course, is the building. It used to be an old wood shack. I think there's a picture of it in the book, as a matter of fact. But in any event, they had public displays of tractors and farm equipment so you could see what it was to be mechanized. It was important because people never saw that kind of stuff before. Face it, automobiles weren't around hardly in those early days. And so this was really an educational process, teaching people what mechanized agriculture was all about, making farmers want to be mechanized because they didn't know any better. You always followed that mule. Now you get on a tractor. So in a way, the department became very active in both marketing and promoting the mechanization of agriculture. And that was an important thing to do. It took something like that to create that mix. A salesman on a car lot or a tractor lot can't do what a Department of biological engineering can do, or agricultural engineering can do, or a university can do. So basically Texas A&M helped link farmers and manufacturers, I guess you could say, with the customers, us, who needed the tractors, and help all of us then live a better world, have a better world. So mechanization was a key part of that whole process, and I won't go into any more details. Well, I will. Okay, back up. Let's talk about cotton pickers for a minute, because I did pick cotton. And they introduced cotton mechanical picking devices as early as about 1915, actually. They began experimenting with it. And in 1928, they developed a horse-drawn stripper, they called it. And that tractor could go, that thing could go between the rows and basically knock the cotton off the stalks and kind of cut it or whatever. And what you got was a mass of tangled weeds with a little bit of cotton stuck in there. It was a royal mess, but it beat it going out and hand picking a little bit. Problem was, ginning was not very helpful in that process. Anyway, they had strippers and sledders early on, extractor devices, and I still remember some of the first cotton pickers that came along in, I guess, the early 50s in my mind, when I first remember seeing them, international harvester pickers, and had those spindles on them and all that stuff, and it was quite a device. In 1928, in fact, well, let's see, there was a horse-drawn stripper had become fairly merchantable or marketable, let's say, in 1928. And what they picked was Bali cotton, they called it, which was a mess, I should say. In 1940, someone developed the Texas State Cotton Harvester, which was a bit of an improvement over it. In fact, A&M had a big hand in doing that. And mechanical picking continued to develop, as you know, until after World War II, you really began to get going with mechanical picking. And I won't go into all the details, but I still remember the spindle pickers. And any of you used any of those things before, or been around them much? Well, it's an interesting device. There's another big step in the mechanization of cotton, incidentally, that is more recent and much more related to current world situation and to the Department of Agricultural Engineering. A&M's Lambert Wilks, you may have known Lambert and Starr Wilks, created a device that made the transition or transportation of cotton from the field to the gin vastly improved. It used to be you picked your cotton, you put it in your bag, you drug that bag out of the field, and then you weighed it or whatever you did, with it, and dumped it into a container of some sort, or sometimes you dumped it into the field, a big mound, until it was time to come pick it up and haul it, throw it into a truck and bring it to the gin. Well, Lambert said, we can do better than that. And we did, basically. What he devised was a sort of temporary storage device or a module. You put in the field, you bring the cotton and put into that module, it would compress the cotton you had harvested into some sort of a unit. You could pick up the module and put it on a truck and bring it to the gin, and it fed the cotton from the module into the gin. Greatly improved the whole process. You got a much better variety of cotton and much better fabric to make your clothes with. As I say, we were all engaged in agriculture. Look at the clothes we wear, face it. So Lambert Wilks was a key, and Texas A&M and the Department of Agricultural Engineering were key factors in the recent development of that kind of context. Incidentally, the oldest operating cotton gin in Texas is still around. It's in Burton, and I don't know if you've been there. Any of you been there? It's worth a trip down, yeah, to see that cotton gin. It's not ginning anymore, but it's still worth going to visit. And I worked in a cotton gin for a short time. And I don't remember what I did, and I'm sure they probably fired me pretty quick, but I did. I was there for a while and learned a lot. Another big factor in the transformation of agriculture was irrigation. And A&M, again, has had a big role in the development of contemporary irrigation. In fact, when I did that history of the American rice industry, that was in the 60s or 70s, but I toured a lot of part of the world in rice, South Texas, South Louisiana, over in Carolinas and so forth. And rice was cultivated with water, basically. You flooded the fields with water, and that was quite a process, developing the improved processes for getting water into the field, getting water out of the field and everything. But in any event, irrigation has been a key, fundamental, transformative instrument in modern agriculture. It didn't exist roughly until after World War II, for all practical purposes. In 1940, there were about 106 acres of irrigated land in Texas. 106 acres. By 1975, there were 85,000 acres of irrigated land in Texas. I don't know what the number is now, but beyond that. So canals and irrigation systems have been a key part of it. In 1964, I guess it was, Congress created approved a Water Resources Institute, and that institute provided funds for basically land-grant colleges to study the problem of water supplies for agriculture, and that helped create A&M's move in the direction of irrigation. A&M created the Low Energy Precision Application System. Actually, A&M's Bill Lyle and his associates were the primary instruments in that development, the Low Energy Precision Application. Today you go out into agricultural fields and you see those irrigation systems everywhere, don't you? And there are a lot of refinements and developments in that. I won't go into that in a lot more, but at least you get the idea that irrigation is a fundamental part in the transformation of modern agriculture. Another key element in that transformation, and we don't think about it, these things either, is what? How about electrification? Was there much electrification before 1915? Not that I know of. Most homes in most towns in Texas didn't have electrification. And I know when growing up, I had a number of aunts and uncles and what have you who still use kerosene lamps. In fact, I still have some of those kerosene lamps I collected in my house. Electricity just didn't exist. Plumbing didn't exist, indoor water and all that stuff. You used the outhouse. You may have been there, done that. And it's nice to have indoor plumbing. In any event, electrification has been a fundamental transformative experience for all of us. We don't think about that anymore, do we? That wasn't here when a lot of us were coming along. Much. It was there, but not in great quantities like we have it today. Even in the 1940s, many farms and homes in Texas lacked electricity, and that development has been substantially overcome. Now almost everybody that I know of has. You know anybody who doesn't have electricity access to their farm or property? In fact, A&M and the Department of Agricultural Engineering organized the Texas Committee on the Relation of Agriculture, of Electricity to Agriculture in 1927. The Texas Committee on the Relation of Electricity to Agriculture, CREA, Committee on the Electrification of Agriculture. And that committee did a great deal to spread the word to people that, yes, there is something you can do to improve your life and your farming and everything else. Members of that committee, its statewide committee incidentally included President of the A&M, Thomas O. Walton, Daniel Scotes, for whom Scotes Hall is named, F.C. Bolton, Dean of Engineering, and so forth. Think about it. Electrification. And we help, in a way, proselytize, if that's the right word, for the conversion of people to electrification. Feed mills, dairies, grist mills, whatever. You don't have to milk that cow anymore. You can stick that thing on there and take care of it. I guess that one thing I did in the history of the Texas Grain and Feed Association, And of course, that's an electrical process, storing and drying and preserving grains and so forth that come out of the field. And finally, then there's the last stage in all of this, the biological stage, and that's still very much ongoing. That's improving genetic varieties of your seed, including improving the quality and length of the fiber in cotton. All that's happening. Better seeds, better feed, better fertilizers, better everything, because you can genetically and chemically examine it and understand it and do better if you can. Plant breeding, in other words. Food and fiber engineering. All of that's part of this changing world we live in. And the American Society for Biological and Agricultural Engineering, incidentally, ASABE, the American Society, excuse me, for Biological and Agricultural Engineering, has also had a powerful impact in creating that change. As former department head Jim Gilley summarized it, there's not a better word to explain what's happened in American life and in American agriculture than one word: change. Change. Boy, has it happened. As I said before, in 1915, there were some 2 million Texans who farmed and raised crops worth about $6.5 million, $3 per capita. In 2015, there are 400,000 Texans who raised crops worth $13.7 billion, or $547 per capita. A&M's grown from a place of 915 students to 60,000 or so students, still growing. The world has changed. And that change has had much to do with American agriculture, with agricultural engineering and biological engineering. And thank you and have a wonderful day.